Welcome to the Independence by Design podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a business owner and ways to get unstuck from the day-to-day so we can design a business that gives us a life of independence. If you caught my episode last week with Lawrence Lepard, the author of The Big Print, this is really an extension of that conversation because, in last week's episode, you're hearing me talk a lot about like what is the actual game, like the foundational layer of the game that we're playing, understanding the economic system, the monetary system impacts your decisions. To answer the question is what I'm doing worth it. And so on today's episode, I was actually on Kim Clark's The Growth Playbook with her father, Beaulieu, who is from ITR Economics. And we have a very fun conversation. Alan and I go back and forth, and I'm just trying to find the truth of like, what is the actual foundation of what is the current situation that we're in, so I can better understand where we're going so we can make better decisions. And I really respect Alan a ton. And so it was just in the process of trying to think through the implications of a lot of the stuff that I talked to Lawrence about last week. That way we can make better decisions about what we're doing today. So I was able to stress test some of my ideas against Alan, his understanding. We're both going back and forth in the search of the truth. And Kim and I were talking about, okay, what do we do about this as we're, sliding into 2026, building a moat around our business and creating sustainable cash flow, good leadership team, understanding predictable revenue, and like understanding how we can build a moat around our companies is going to be the utmost importance. And so hopefully this episode gives you a little bit more of the more practical, why are we going to be doing all of this stuff? And I'm going to continue to deliver more episodes on like how. And the episode after this, Jeff West is going to be on, probably one of the favorite conversations I've had about leadership and building a business that's surrounding yourself with people that can help you navigate these waters to build a Noah's Ark and have a huge amount of impact and success, even though the waters are choppy. So this is a light of hope, and it should give you some serious courage or encouragement that there's a lot of good stuff and not a lot of opportunities are in the environment when there's a lot of challenges. So enjoy the conversation with Kim and Alan.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our latest episode of The Growth Playbook with myself, Kim Clark, and my dad, Alan Beaulieu, and our special guest today, Ryan Tansom. Thanks for joining us again, Ryan.
What's up? I'm excited.
Today, we are going to be talking about and breaking down a podcast episode that we all watched by Luke Groman. The title of it is Has the Debt Spiral Started? Ryan was so kind to share it with me. I found it interesting to listen to. I shared it with my dad. He found it interesting to listen to. And we thought there are a lot of perspectives in there that potentially our audience are also feeling or considering. So let's break it down as part of our overall series of planning for the future with confidence. So thank you for agreeing to jump on this topic. I have lots of questions for both of you, but just curious where either of you would like to get started.
I can start. Yeah, I'll just kind of preface it with, I'm super excited for the conversation, Alan, because as I've been trying to spend like an insane amount of my time trying to figure out like what is the actual landscape of the playing field of what we're all dealing with. Like, how do we make bets? I mean, one of your books is Make Your Move. And I've just been trying to map out like what the hell's going on. Because I, fully subscribe to like certain fundamentals of the demographics, the debt, all these different things. So I have found it more and more difficult as I get into the weeds to figure out how to reconcile what I believe to be true, but also what I'm not sure about. Because I'm like, I don't know how to articulate this as well as I could, but like trying to find, and I respect you so much, like trying to find other people that are like, okay, like how are you thinking about this? Because we're starting on like a certain foundation of like, hey, there's these things we all agree upon, but like how do we continue to get better together? And so I'm excited for the conversation.
That truly proves you're a geek because you get excited about these types of conversations.
Yeah, well, yeah. I've come to that conclusion quite a while ago, so here we are.
But maybe we can, a nice way that to position it from our perspective, and I'm sure yours too, Ryan, is that we can help people. I mean, that's been our goal for years and years, and yours too, is just to help businesses and help individuals. So this conversation can be geared, in my mind, towards that. One of the things that you brought to my mind as you were speaking, and I used to tell the younger economists this and also clients, because they would go, what's going to be the trigger to whatever the event was, whether it's recovery or a recession, what's going to be the trigger? And I would say, as we were years out, I go, who the heck knows?
Yeah,
You
right.
can't.
It's called black swan for a black swan for a reason, right?
Yeah, and even if it's not a black swan, just a normal economic event, it can spring up out of seemingly out of nowhere. What I would tell people is you can be focusing on these four things and find out it's the fifth thing coming out of the woods that's going to get you. And so keep your head on a swivel, and you're more likely to see it coming rather than being hyper focused. And I agree with what you're saying. You know, we've talked about the basics, but what's going to be the trigger? We know the dominoes that are going to fall, but what's going to push that domino? What's going to be the thing that just knocks over that first one so that it continues? And in my mind, it's not going to be starting here. It's actually going to start in China. Which
interesting. And maybe and Kim, you got some questions, so I don't want to derail us. Maybe one of the questions I have, and you can put it into like how you want to guide this, but by trigger, like what do we think the thing, like how does this unfold? You know, one of the conversations we had in one of our previous episodes was, is it actually a crash or is it a melt up where our money's not worth anything anymore? And then how crabby does everybody get that they can't pay for things based on their living wage? And so like, I've been trying to figure out how to map out like, what is that when you say like that domino, that triggering event, like what are the things that could unfold? Because I think, you know, from my conversations that I have with people think that there's going to be like another, you know, we're going to go on Bloomberg and everything's going to be down. And, you know, and that's kind of how they're mapping the potential crisis. So I'm just curious, Kim, on how we want to navigate that part of the conversation.
Well, I'm sure Dad has thoughts on it. I documented some of like the major takeaways in the Luke Groman podcast. So it was economic precarity and Fed policy, debt spiral and inflation risk, AI and labor disruption, petrodollar system and geopolitical shifts, which Dad, I think that ties into some of the China stuff that you were just going towards, because it actually had an interesting point where it said Middle East trust erosion is pushing countries toward China and away from US dollar dominance, was one of the take. And so I'd love to kind of break down this podcast by Luke Groman and say, like, what are like the thoughts and positions and agree, disagree, why from he talks a lot about stable coins and Bitcoins. Ryan, you're our in-house expert on that subject. So I'm just thinking I have some of those questions for you. And then Dad is our expert economist too, just on these other points too. So if you want to start maybe with what you were talking about with the geopolitical shifts, and what are your thoughts on their perspective in the podcast where it would be pushing countries toward China and away from the US dollar?
Pushing them towards China, India, Russia, the three in alignment is the key, and maybe involve Brazil, maybe not. And it's not so much pushing them that way, although we could be very good at pushing that way, but the three of them attracting people as well. So it's not just no choice, you know, the U.S. is forcing us. There'll be nations who want to go there, and that could include the Middle East. Where both China and Russia have a presence as well, as we know. That could cause a shift in the balance of power economically in the world, because their GDP combined is almost the same as the GDP of the United States. So that's a lot of weight. And if we're no longer the leading economic power, that takes away some of our say in the world, some of our ability in the world, some of our push to have our own way in the world. And that can cause a lot of people, I think, to wonder, all right, what about the dollar? What about the debt? Will they keep buying our debt and all that kind of stuff? And I think that's a very valid point that he brings up. There can be this geopolitical shift. And, is it possible? Yeah, it's absolutely possible. But it's also possible, and I know I'm sounding like a two-handed economist here, and I apologize, but there's something called involution going on in China, where they're demographic base can't afford things, and where their real estate market's a mess, and their government funding of businesses that can't make a profit is a short road to disaster. So we tend to think of China as this great, big, powerful, monolithic being that can come along and pound the stuffing out of us. They're beginning to look like they're hanging on, as opposed to going forward. Ryan, do you agree? I see you shaking your head, but they could be
nodding my head. Nodding my head. Yeah. Yeah, I do agree, Alan. And what I try to do is map what I understand to be true on top of the dynamics, so I can go to the first principles instead of getting so stuck in the nuances. And like I go, okay, it's what I've very much appreciated about Luke Groman, Lynn Alden, and like Michael Howell, like just people, like, which is why I've loved listening to you for years, is like, okay, what are the general trends and the situations? And you throw in Europe, you throw in Canada, you throw in Australia, there's talks and potential that they're unrealized capital gains. You go, so for my brain, I go, what the hell's going on across the board? Because the way that I look at it, like, okay, well, if you like take one of those topics in isolation, it doesn't have any context. And I go, well, all of these countries, their dollars are bankrupt. And you go like, well, they're just printing money to keep things going. And all of their populations are getting poorer, including us. So it's a currency war across the globe. And I look at like Luke's comments, and I don't know whether when I kind of go like, there's what's to be true, and then what are people predicting is going to happen. I really don't know what's going to happen. And I'm very open to that. I'm just trying to figure out and continue to build that foundation. What do I believe to be true? And go, well, all of these countries have been buying the dollar, and we keep printing more. So they're saving in the dollar, and we're stealing from them along with every bondholder. And there was two things that Luke Groman said. One was on this podcast, another one was on another one, where there was a few, like a month ago, when Trump just said, good luck, BRICS. And these are his words, not mine, that was as, for him, as monumental as the fall of the Berlin Wall, because it was like, hey, we chose peace, kind of like, we can't fight our way out of this. And then a few weeks later, China and the whole rare earth, debate is like, China's like, your fake dollars can't buy the stuff that we have to mine out of the earth. So then there becomes like back to then the China and the BRICS, but like they're starting to trade in gold and oil because it's like actually a sound money that can't be diluted. And so I know there's a lot behind this, but I kind of like map out like what's the game being played, and I look across the countries in the geopolitical environment, and it's an economic currency war trying to figure out how to keep things going without having everything collapse underneath itself. And I don't know if you think that like, what do you think is true, not true in that, or like, how do you process like the overall landscape?
I think it's an overstatement in that. I don't think there's a currency war going on. I think there is some skirmishes, if you want to call them that, but we're not seeing a flight from the dollar. I mean, 2025, there's been a little debasement, but that happens. I mean, we're not looking at a falling dollar, which if there's a true currency war going on and people were just running from the dollar, we'd be seeing an entirely different economic landscape. We'd be seeing a lot more inflation and purchasing power erosion and all kinds of things. And the reason I'm not sanguine, but I'm not really as concerned about all that right now, is because the bond market is still going go U.S. The bond market is still buying U.S. bonds. And if they're really concerned about the dollar failing, and there are a bunch of smart people around the world, they would not be buying U.S. bonds. They would already be in Australian or Canadian bonds. But they're not. They're still buying U.S. bonds.
What do you think about Luke's comments then about the bond market? And like, so Luke's got comments about the bond market, and the bond market has dictated most of the global trade and global decisions since 71 effectively, or even before, since the Bretton Woods. And there's nowhere else to go is part of the problem. And then I think that kind of lends into like, well, China, I mean, like even Michael Howell is a fantastic source. He wrote Capital Wars. He talks about the U.S. is saying, trust our technology and trust us. And China is saying, if you can't trust us, trust the soundness of our money. So people are floating more towards that because of, various reasons. But at the end of the day, when I map on, okay, what do I believe to be true? Like Lynn Alden has a lot more probably towards your approach of like, hey, it's not dooming, it's not crazy catastrophe tomorrow. There's a baked in 8 to 10% debasement. And like as things, First Brands, and they don't know if they have $50 billion in losses or not in the private debt markets. And they're just going to get bailed out left and right, which just bakes in the 8 to 10% debasement, which means anybody holding bonds has got problems. But then there's this balance between it. Like you can't just have it all unfold tomorrow because it would be complete catastrophe. So then do we take more of the Lynn approach to say, okay, well, there's a problem here from our investment strategy. And like, as you just kind of just is factoring in a lot of that debasement because it just the nature of the system. And then we need the bonds market. We need the bond. You know what I mean? I think you and I talked about that in the last call. Like we can't have a switch tomorrow. It would be a disaster for everyone.
I think that's a really key point. And part of the title to the podcast we're talking about was, were we on the cusp or on the edge or the beginning of? And I think everything you just talked about and we've been talking about for the last few minutes says, no, we're not on the edge. Could we, if the premise is right, and that's what Brian and I have been saying for a long time is going to be part of the problem. The bond market is going to get to a point and go, you guys are screwy. But it's not going to be just because we're screwed. It's going to be because China's a disaster and Europe's a mess. And it's not a U.S. faulted thing. It's a global financial mess. We're not there yet. The bond market's showing we're not there yet. The machinery's still working. So I disagree with the whoever came up with the title. I don't know if it was him. Probably the marketing.
That's what I struggle, Alan, with the YouTube titles, and Kim, the marketing expert here, is you have to be clickbait and go to the algorithm gods in order to get viewed, and maybe that's why I'm not as popular as we should be. I agree with you, Alan, on the title.
Now, there's also this talk has been going on for a long time. And I know we have talked about how we've handed somewhat of the keys to the kingdom to China, and that they hold so much of our debt. They can really have a major attack on the dollar anytime they want to, which would have an impact on them in the world. So probably won't, but they could. As far as the petrodollar, that's been a conversation for a long time. Middle East has been, when they get angry with us, they start trading in other currencies or taking other currencies. But the RMB is not a stable currency. It's not a good bet. So I would ask people all the time. They go, "What about BRIC? What about dollar losing its status as the reserve currency of the world?" I go, "It's not the reserve currency. It's just the preferred currency. Where else would you go? Just stop."
What do you say about and how about the the rampant purchasing of gold by every central bank now, where they're now holding more gold reserves than US dollars?
Yep. I don't know. I haven't checked that out. I'll take your word for it. I would get asked that occasionally, and my answer was, how much gold is there in the world? How fast can we get it on the ground? Is it enough to cover the reserves that are needed and the currencies? Because people say we should go back to having a dollar backed by gold. I go, there's not enough gold on the planet anymore for that. You'd be causing such a dramatic upheaval in the value of that dollar that you'd ruin economies around the world. So stop talking like that. It can't happen. It's good to have it as a reserve. That's your emergency fund, if you will. But you can't base the global economy on gold anymore. It's just not possible.
Because we printed so much, and why I think fiat is garbage. My personal opinion.
Well, it could be. It could be, but that's where we are, though. I mean,
right? No, agreed, Alan. And when I've heard Luke Groman talk about it, Michael Howell has a new Substack that came out that I should send your guys' way. There's this play, and this is where I'm in the process of learning how this stuff works, so I might trip on my words or concepts a little bit, but agreed with you. If you were to, what happened with Europe after World War II, they tried to pretend that they didn't print all that money, and their economy stagnated for a long time, and they lost their reserve, their main status. China's trying to increase the price per dollar of gold because it benefits them. And technically, if we raised I remember the numbers yesterday, it was like if the gold per ounce is $5,000 versus at about 20,000, I don't know what the dollar, like the gold and Bitcoin as sound money could potentially be a release valve as the stable coins and continued printing happens. Instead of having my house be worth $5 million, the developed countries and other assets are, taking that release or helping with the release of that to keep the bond market volatile. Because what Michael Howell's framework is over the last 20 years, 30 years, we became a debt refinancing world economy instead of a cash flow investing economy. And so throughout this process, we're constantly needing to have the asset values go up, but the at the bottom of that pyramid is the bond market. And so the more volatile the bond market, the more trouble it is to refinance these debts. So we want the bond market to be nice and stable. And so what I've understood is the stable coins and all these different mechanisms is to keep that bond market stable to help the debt refinancing. So it's balance sheet capacity more than it is cash flow these days, which I just find as a fascinating a concept in itself.
It is a fascinating concept, and it's the fundamental flaw. I think we agree on that. Certainly, is that the U.S. and other nations that have gotten into this serious debt cycle is an intractable problem, and the only thing that fixes it is a bust. Going back to Luke in the discussion there, he talked about inflation and inflating our way out of trouble and all the rest of that. And then he talked about there's potential that it could get to be really serious inflation. But he kind of dismissed it, as I remember. And I thought, well, that's the flaw, because there's no time that you don't get into an inflation cycle where eventually the economy basically falls apart. Weimar Republic, Venezuela. I mean, pick any of the main.
There's a book called Gradually Then Suddenly. You ever heard that?
Yeah.
There's a concept. Yeah. At some point, people are like, "What? I don't. No, thanks."
Yeah. So my house is worth $5 million, but I can't afford to get a loaf of bread because it's going to double in price. And
Alan, I picture that picture. It's from Germany, and they're literally shoveling the paper marks in for heat into the stove.
Yeah, because it means nothing otherwise. So I think I'm going to go back to where you were before. The nuances and the details are fun and it's interesting and all the rest of that. But the greater theme is, if we're living in a system, and I think we are, that's creating global inflation for multiple reasons, not just because of the debt, but because of demographics, because of mindset, modern monetary theory, talk about universal basic income, all kinds of things that are going to lead us to this position, then it's in my mind, an inescapable conclusion that we will have inflation that becomes so problematic as to cause the economy to burst, because the Fed, central banks around the world, will have to step in and do something, or the economy will just collapse on its own, as it did in Venezuela or Weimar, et cetera.
I totally agree with you, because that's two types. Yeah. And that's why, like, when I think about where Lynn Alden potentially has things slightly off, or some of these other, it's like, you can't just do this forever, to what you're saying. You can't, like, at some point, even the commercial banking system is a complete Ponzi scheme, because, like, they're lending things out at 6%. The government's printing at 8%. I mean, they're completely illiquid. I mean, if you keep doing that, and the whole, at some point, and what I saw with China a couple of weeks ago is China said, we have to spend real time and energy mining rare earths, and we don't want your fake dollar as an exchange of that. And so, like, in that, there sounds like there's, like, they're kind of tamping that down for now, whatever conversations are happening. But at some point, I'm in total agreement where that there will be a halt to say, like, this doesn't make any sense anymore. And whether it's the fact that most people can't afford anything. I mean, like, my wife got her 4% raise last week, and it's a total effing joke. I ran the numbers after taxes, and literally just the health insurance cost doesn't cover that. And thank God I can just go sell more shit as an individual and make more money, like, whatever. But, like, if you don't have a variable, like, ability to, make more money, good luck with any of this. And So, but what I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is that's where I like when I think about most people that I talk to that are not in the weeds of all this stuff, they think it's gonna be a Bloomberg crash down when the money actually is. It's when I say melt up, it like becomes like they're looking for stuff that's scarce, right? Like they're looking for hard assets, whether it's businesses or buildings or commodities or something that like, and I think there's this big kind of glaring red light for everybody where the AI bubble, like, I mean, I can't never pronounce his name, the CEO of Microsoft, I can't remember how to pronounce it, but he literally said, we have racks and racks and racks full of NVIDIA GPUs, and we literally can't plug them in because we have no energy. So like everything between the rare earths and like all of the trade that the global trade and AI and data centers and all those business models of tech was like, we don't have infrastructure. Now it's like you have infrastructure that takes real effing energy to pull it out of the ground and plug it in. And now the economics of the business models are like obviously broken. So I like when I think about all of that, I go, okay, well, is there a crash down where all of a sudden my house goes from worth $5 million to 200 grand again? And then or is it like we have to switch the monetary base layer? Like how do you see what that looks like?
You cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. I just wanted you to know that.
It's tough up in the 6 inches between my ears, Alan. That's why I want to talk to you.
All right, let's start at the beginning. You mentioned rare earth, okay? And whenever you say rare earth, I think of one of my favorite rock bands. Rare Earth is a great band. But I think they were playing, and I don't mean this probably as harsh as it's going to sound. I think they were doing a Donald Trump. I think they were just putting on a face. They need to and want to sell rare earth because they need the commerce. They need more.
Yeah.
So to slander or slam the dollar, better way to put it, it's just their way of fighting back and saying, your currency is not worth jack. So, we're not going to send you any rare earth. Now that's settled down. They're sending rare earth again.
Minus the military components from what I've gathered, which makes sense. Like why would China fund our ability to build bombs to bomb them? And like, so hence like, we maybe have chosen peace because like we're going to get our supply chain to then fight you, China. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. But we also have things that we ship to them that help their military. So we'll just cut that off too. And when you do that, actually, it tends to lead to war because people get desperate. Another discussion.
It's kind of like but isn't it kind of economic mutually assured destruction, which is kind of a good thing for all of us, right? Because it's not as dramatic as what most people probably think.
It is a mutually assured destruction. Globalization and the holding of resources. Our interconnectivity means that we need each other. We're not doing this for fun. So if we disconnect, it is destructive to many, many nations. I like people to think there are producer nations, there are end user nations, there are intermediary producers, raw material producers, intermediaries, final producers, and consumption. We're towards the latter part. And so if we all of a sudden fall as a nation, it's a domino. I mean, the small little countries that have no direct connection to the United States are going broke because nobody needs your junk anymore. So it's a horrible thing. Will it happen? Again, it will happen. Will it be because of rare earth? No. Will it be because of tariffs? No. To your point earlier, it's not one thing. But if the United States loses its allies because of its intractability, because of its unwillingness to get along, its unwillingness to be friendly, whatever the reason might be, to Kim's earlier point, we could be pushing those people into a relationship they don't really want. And that feeds really well into, I'm trying to remember his name real quickly. The end of the world is just the beginning. Peter Zane's. Peter Zane's deglobalization. And with deglobalization comes that economic collapse that we've been talking about. So it could be a political source. It could be a debt source. It could be a dollar source. I mean, there's a number of ways that it could come about. I think the important thing to do is to do what you said earlier, Ryan, which is have some gold. and probably real gold as opposed to just gold futures, because you
Mm-hmm.
can't
It's
gold futures.
paper derivatives is not it's not in your safe.
That's right. And don't tell anybody how much you have in your safe, because it's not safe anymore. It's this.
Exactly.
And you have
So
to protect yourself, whether it's Bitcoin or stablecoin. You know much more about that than I do. The Genius Act certainly is going to help stablecoin and other cryptocurrencies like it, because the backing of the United States still means something. We may find that there's a return to reasoned thinking, because we're crossing the point now where what we pay in interest payments in the United States in our budget is in excess of our defense spending, and it's chasing after what we spend on Medicare. So, when people start paying attention to that, they're going to go, this is crazy, because they can say, let the boomers die. But when it's your generation, it's going to go, wait a minute here. Now you're mortgaging my future.
well, and it's already happened. And like, that's where I struggle seeing a actual like red line candle handle down. It's like, I mean, there's what is a 95% correlation to the deficit spending and demographics. I mean, they've inverted those two charts and it's they like map on each other perfectly. And when I think about all the financials, Alan, that I rip through with company financials, payroll and rent are the two, right? And then everything else is like on the margins. You can't cut your way. And you name every single private equity firm that's having troubles right now. It's like you got debt, you got payroll, you got rent. It's like you can't cut your way out of it. You got must grow your way out of that. And so that's where even Elon's comment is like, all right, and then Scott Bassett and everybody's like, we got to grow our way out of this. And when I look at history, it's through capital controls where the government's borrowing at less interest than everybody else. Everyone else's assets go up in value. Like the whole economy's GDP grows because they're stealing our wealth through debasement. And it could like, and when I'm trying to map on like, what does it actually like, what is the actual is there an event, or is it just slowly people cannot afford anything and get really like the social unrest? Ray Dalio's got his like, internal fighting meter or whatever on top of his other couple things that he measures. And so is there like do you actually see an economic collapse where like there's like all the prices go back down? Because then how do you handle the debt and the debt payments?
Again, number of thoughts. The answer to one of your questions is B, because you offered two choices. So the answer is B. Now you got to remember which question. That's only fair.
Yeah. So the answer is B of like do you believe it'll be like prices go down, or that
deflation's coming? Deflation in the next decade will occur, not immediately. It'll be later, after the depression begins, you eventually get to deflation. And the values of things go down, wages will go down, and it's kind of reset. What happens there, though, because that's a great question, is how does that end? It ends because, and I think we've talked about this, my generation dies. I'm a fairly young boomer, so when I die, it'll be a good sign, because things will be getting better.
Kim, just like, come on, Dad. What about your grandkids?
I just call you every day. Nope, still here. Nope, still here.
Hey, by the way, when can I get some life insurance on you? I'm like,
now the bulk of the boomers will be dying, late 2030s, early 2040s, and that's going to allow you folks to make some smart financial decisions at the governmental level as to how are we going to change things, because the big burden's gone. The drain on the economy globally, so it's not just U.S. voters, but every country going to decide, all right, how are we going to change this? Because we've just seen that was real bust. That was real painful. So that's the reset. And it's allowed by or provided courtesy of the people who brought the problem on, my generation around the world, and our leaving takes the problem with us. You folks should learn the lesson. That just doesn't work.
Have you heard of the fourth turning?
It's Neil Howe's fourth turning.
Yep.
Where people realize that, and we'll actually find more unity within the nation because we're facing a common enemy, hunger. and,
Yep.
and things like
The
that.
fourth
So,
turning is that like Neil's timelines a lot. It's really interesting because Neil's timelines map on top of your, and Brian's timelines map on top of like the whole 2030s, the demographics, and like I think it's by 2035 ish to 24. I mean, that's when on the other side of this is what they're kind of talking about, and so all of it is very fascinating because all the fundamentals kind of all end up lining up with each other. Um, like back to your deflation, and there's a guy Jeff Booth that I follow, which is interesting, where like, and Luke Groman has said it, where deflation and AI are completely incompatible with the fiat debt system. Because if we're refinancing, and that's what the economy's in, we have to have our asset values go up, and we have to pretend that the values are there to keep things going. And in the natural free markets, deflation is the actual natural state because we're making more productivity. And so it doesn't reconcile with the fiat system where you have to have more asset inflation to do the debt refinancing.
I disagree that deflation is a natural economic state. I don't think that's true. You could find and make an argument that in certain places, maybe even industries, deflation occurs. But with a growing population, it's really hard to make an argument that deflation is a natural state, because increased population means increased consumption, which means increased demand, which feeds the ability to keep prices or raise prices.
So if we have deflation though, in your example or in your scenario, how does that reconcile with how much debt we have, and how do you reconcile, like, in your mind, how do you reconcile what the debt is, what the asset price is, and like how does that actually recalibrate and get restructured? Do you think we write off the debt at some point, or is it how do you think about how that all gets reset?
The trillions being spent in Medicare can then be turned to start paying down the debt. Simple. If you vote appropriately. And that's not one party over the other, because both parties are terrible at this.
Yeah, it's a uniparty. Totally agree. I mean, it doesn't matter.
So when I die, that money it takes to keep me alive, especially in the last 3 months with all the surgery to give me another 3 months on top of that, a pretty painful existence. If that is used wisely, you really do make a difference in a pretty short period of time. But it has to be a political decision caused by the will of the people. So that brings up the question of, are people, I don't want to say smart enough, aware enough, educated enough to do that? Not now is the answer, in my opinion, but given the pain of the Depression, where people go, what the heck happened? How did we get here? You and Kim will be saying, this is how we got here. I won't be saying that, because I'll be going like, is my food pureed? But you guys can explain it all.
Yeah, and what I don't disagree with the premise of it, and because I kind of going towards, and you've joked around about thinking about people, is like Mandini was just voted in because people want more free shit because their lives suck so bad. And so you go, okay, well, I mean, in Ray Dalio's framework, for better or for worse, part of it I like, where it's like, we're either going to get fascists or communists because people are so freaking mad. So there's this political dynamic of like, at what point do people's social unrest become so unbearable? And like, what I struggle with personally is like, I can understand the narrative that people are like, okay, my life is really hard. My parent, like, I can't afford anything to buy houses or cars or anything anymore. They're looking for an answer, and they don't understand the math or the economics like we do. So they're trying to find something to either blame or something to either give them relief. But then you go, well, we know it doesn't work. Like, from the math, like, you can't just like, okay, great. You're now what are you going to do? You're going to print more money and all the capital disappears. And so how does the social part factor into your kind of mental model, like how this works? And like, what you think people, well, can we get to the point where we wait for you all to pass away and then just, redirect that cash flow to pay off the debt? Or like, are people willing to deal with that for the next 10, 15 years?
Yeah, it's not going to be that long. And yes, I think it's the boiling frog syndrome. You can bear that pain. And I forget the saying, and you talked about earlier too, the people think an impending disaster will be here much sooner than it actually usually is. But once
Mhm.
it get here, it happens. You fall off the cliff faster. You're not sliding down a slope. Um, and I think the civil unrest or the uneasiness that we feel now isn't really civil unrest. You weren't around in the 60s. There was a lot of civil unrest in the 60s. And there were riots and protests and lots of stuff that was just uh, truly nerve-wracking to a lot of people, and rightfully so. We're not
Mhm.
there. We're simply not there. And when we get there, that's Neil Howe's thinking, we're going to find ourselves into this economic mess that's going to unify us. We're going to go, or we'll be at war, so we'll put it off to the side, or there'll be an alien invasion out of space kind of. That
I know. You're talking about what is that? What's the
Independence
oh
Day.
no, I know, but there's is it blue? There's some blue project or whatever. They think that the aliens are going to come out and it's like, look over here while they do everything. It's just this distraction. You'll have to look it up. It's called the Blue Project or something like that. But it's literally like this conspiracy theory of like they're going to pretend there's aliens out while the big event happens. It's yeah.
The again, that's part of the what are the trigger things that I try. I mean, I like reading this stuff, and actually, um, I think Luke overstates the case. I think he's calling for it too early, and I think when they were somewhat talking about the massive amount of job loss caused by AI, I think he's totally wrong. And for one thing, you brought it up. The electricity is an issue.
Right.
And powering all this and the amount of water that it takes, environmentally sound, and the actual application of AI to all those jobs. Kim and I had a podcast about that with the BLS. The amount of jobs that probably be lost to AI in the next 10 years was 1.1 million. How many jobs will be open in other fields that AI can't fill? 2.2 million. It's just.
Well, and I tend to agree with you too, Alan, on that because the even like the robotics, we don't have the supply chain or the ability to get all the robotics and all that stuff even deployed right now. And yeah, I agree with you on the inflation or on the AI's impact. And Kim, what other questions? Because I mean, this has been great. I'm curious what are some of the other directions that you had that you wanted to go with the.
He doesn't want to talk to me anymore, Kim. He's talking to you now.
No. I think this is
He's
great,
done
Alan,
with
because
you.
well, let me just recalibrate. Like, I'm just trying to understand how to map what is knowable versus the hypothetical. For me, for my clients, back to how you even started, like, we just want to help people. Where if people are making 5-10 year bets with their company, with their capital, we just want to, like, I mean, one of my clients, I maybe this would be an interesting hear your comment on this. Like, we got done with this board meeting a couple weeks ago. They're in the and he's probably listening and he'll know who I'm talking about. So he's in the boiler space. And we're trying to figure out, he's got a bunch of cash at this end of this year. Right. I mean, like he over succeeded his projections. And we had then the next 5-year projections and we were looking at the growth rate, what 10%. We're going, okay, do we believe that? Well, we don't have the labor to actually realize that growth. And we have extra cash. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we do with that? We started talking about, do we give everybody a 10% pay bump? Do we pay for everybody's health care? Because we are just ideas, right? We're not saying that this has to be done, but he's trying to look at, how to place his bets and it's solving this labor crisis for him of skilled labor. Do we have an academy and some training and certifications to attract right people? So like, that's a long-term bet he's trying to make and trying to understand how to handle making the moves. So I bring all that up to say, like, I am appreciating understanding this and building out that foundation of what's knowable versus like what could happen and how do you view the 2030 dynamics so that way we can map out what we know to be true to the highest ability without overshooting one way or the other.
Yeah. And I like what you were saying, and build his labor force, keep his labor force. So you got to train them, you got to have the academy, and you got to have a moat around them so they don't go somewhere else. And paying their health insurance is a big moat, and providing for some nice benefits. the other side of the coin you touched on, which I would also encourage that person to do, is whatever you can automate through robotics, different types of robotics, but robotics or automation might be a better word for it. Do that without displacing people, because you're going to need those people as you're going to grow that 10% a year. So you're just going to repurpose the people as you bring in some electronics. Not rocket science. As far as the investment goes, again, not having to know where it's coming from. It's a question of, all right, how do I protect myself from inflation? That's a wealth advisor concept. And the wealth advisor's job is therefore to say, well, dang, Skippy, you don't want to be all in on bonds. That's not the place to go.
Come on, support it. Thank you for your charity.
My point being, in general terms, we can help companies like you are helping companies, because those things are straightforward without having to worry about whether the debasement is real or not, and whether the debt spiral is going to begin in 27, 28, or 29. That's not really important to guiding the company and people through the near term. Where my heart goes, by the way, is to the people that you were talking about before, usually called the lower middle class or upper poverty level folks. I mean, this is a tough world. This is not an easy life to have. And
I think the middle class is getting eviscerated. I mean,
I like that word. That hurts though.
Yeah, because honestly, Alan, I'm turning 39 in a couple of weeks, and
you are.
Yeah.
Oh, Dodger, you.
I know. My dad about cried because he saw this picture where we were doing our second company party for the family business, and I'm the same age he was when he was in that picture, and he was like, my brain. I was like, yeah, it goes fast. But Alan, out of my wife's high school friends who are our dear friends, and then I've got, and then my college buddies, only a few entrepreneurs. Everybody else is double income earner, very, very well-to-do people for the most part, hard workers. And it's freaking hard. People are making good money, and it's really hard. And of course, they're not going to go complain to the rest of the people, because it's just even harder for everybody else. So it's just, I think that's why I go back to what is this? So what are people's capabilities of dealing with this hard shit? And I think it's a lot more than most people think, to your point. And I agree with that. Where it's the boiling frog. I'm an entrepreneur for a reason. I just want to control my own destiny. People listening to this podcast are also probably in that vein of I'm just going to go do the things I need to do to prosper in this situation. I'm curious what your thoughts about this are, because you mentioned the wealth manager and then the business. And Kim, this is what you and I have started talking about with how we're collaborating on our coaching businesses. Is I have a thesis that for people that it's not right for everybody, of sell the business to a third party versus get out of the operations and run the company from the boardroom and keep the asset and use a playbook like Kim and I have been talking about. I think that the financial return and the cash flow available to keeping a privately held company that's not saddled with debt because you didn't sell it to PE, my client has the ability to look into the future, price elasticity with his clients. So picking his clients in his industries, looking at the payroll and looking at the cash flow becomes like a Noah's Ark to go through this. And there's a very strong argument to say, hey, as long as we can extract you from your job and you can still make your 20 to 50 grand a month in free cash flow after distributions, and you can keep reinvesting that money, there's a very strong argument to keep the business instead of selling the business, getting it, trading that equity for other fiat money that you have to then figure out how to keep. So there is a strong argument for people who have very specific needs to want to sell to a third party. But Kim, you and I have talked, well, you should probably get your shit together and figure out how to get that thing sold in the next couple of years as fast as possible, or how to build a moat and figure out how to continue to run that cash flowing company. But thinking about the landscape that we're talking about should be mapped on that decision of what they're doing. Comments from both of you. Curious, maybe Kim, you want to fill any gaps in, because you and I have talked a lot about this, and your dad a lot better than I do, obviously.
I think you covered it pretty well. I'm just looking at the time. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So I don't know. I want to end with some advice for our listeners too. Like a summary thought on, we unpacked a lot on our expectations over the next 10 or so years. And would love just to kind of, for the individual and for businesses, what would our overall advice be? Ryan, you started heading there with the building a moat if you're going to hang on to it. If not, start putting your plans into place now. And then just curious, Dad, other thoughts on, like, you had started with your heart goes out to the people that aren't making as much money as some of the upper class and such. So just curious, like, what advice do we have when we to set people free from our show today, and they can not leave with doom and gloom in their hearts and minds that everything's falling apart and there will be a crash in the future. I go back to, there is prosperity in an age of decline. That was the name of your book. So how can you prosper during this age of decline? Because you can't stop it. So then what do you do?
Well, what Ryan said, you position your company for whatever your company happens to be. And you decide what course you're going to be on. You can't be ambivalent about it. This is the path I'm on, and this is what I need to do to prepare to be on that path, whichever path it happens to be. And businesses are not going to all fail. I mean, this depression is not the 1930s. No matter whose model you're looking at, it's not the 1930s. So that means you'll still be making sales, but you'll less sales, less profit. Learn how to live with that. Get your mind wrapped around that. Prepare yourself for that. And I'm going to end it with something that I have deep embedded in me is, as you're going through this will give you, the business owner, the board member, the entrepreneur, the greatest opportunity to do good in this world. It's not going to, I think you want to do something good in this world, you're going to have a great opportunity, and you want to have people start thinking positively about business owners and capitalism and stuff. Do good in this world and make it known. A lot of people do it privately, and I go, don't do that. You want every employee to know that this is the company I work for. We're feeding people, we're housing people, and so that they can feel proud that they're actually contributing, as opposed to, the boss is getting rich and we're not doing anything to help people. So I'm going to end there. Do good in this world.
Yeah. Exclamation point, underline, highlight for that, Alan. And I think the way that I'm enjoying helping people do that is getting that visibility into the future with their ownership goals of cash flow and valuation. So they're not just guessing off of revenue. They can look into the future, their financials. And then, like, the only reason that client that I was telling you about feels okay even entertaining a 10% raise and free health insurance, because he knows his cash position and it's good for him, and he knows there will be a return. So it's not just because he's doing it for the hell of it. But what allows him to do both and is do it for the betterment of the company. And it gives him great joy to be able to have amazing people work for him, and where his culture can be way better off than the people that are working for their competitors. So to your point, and that brings him great joy, and it makes him excited to do the hard work. Kim, I'm curious on your 2 cents, because you and I are looking to figure out how to continue to collaborate more and more to help people for these exact reasons.
I think mine lends itself closer to the building a moat around the business, right? What is your business strategy? What is your business plan? Helping them realize that what worked last year isn't going to work next year. And just helping them wrap their heads around, you can't just plan for 10% increase year over year and assume that's going to continue on. Like, we are headed into some rough waters. And knowing that, being aware of it, you can develop plans. I always say through every challenge is an opportunity. And so that's what I'm just out there helping people do, is find those opportunities and maximize the results of those opportunities. So I guess that's my ending thought. I love the do good, and mine is through every challenge is an opportunity, and we're headed towards a really big period of challenges. And so let's work and be diligent on working on the business instead of just everyday working in the business.
Love it.
Period. Exclamation point.
End of story.
Well,
Well,
awesome.
gentlemen, today was fun. Thank you for joining for the episode. Those watching, you have any questions for Ryan, his information will be in the description, so you can easily get in touch with him. That guy there.
And then subscribe to YouTube and click share, wherever the tags are all over.
All the things.
Good to see you, Alan. Kim, thanks so much for facilitating this. So fun. I enjoy it.
Always fun, Ryan. Always fun.
Yeah.